Chapter 8, Metaphysics and the Unconscious. Our labors are witnesses for the living mystery. C.G. Jung. 1. Empirical Metaphysics. The process of individuation often expresses itself in symbolic images of a metaphysical nature. Such images can be a problem to the empirical psychotherapist who is reluctant to give credence to grandiose, unprovable ideas about life, especially since such ideas are often associated with obvious inflation, for example, in psychosis. Also, the common collective misuse of metaphysical images is a cause for caution. For the psychologist, the word metaphysics tends to connote arbitrary assertions on faith about the nature of ultimate reality. It calls to mind dogmatic attitudes which are repugnant to the empirical temperament. To the scientist, metaphysical dogmatism is a demonstration of the fact that one is, quote, most ignorant of what he is not most assured, close quote. Jung also avoided the term. For instance, he wrote, I approach psychological matters from a scientific and not from a philosophical standpoint. I restrict myself to the observation of phenomena, and I eschew any metaphysical or philosophical considerations. In another place, he says, Psychology, as the science of the soul, has to confine itself to its subject and guard against overstepping its proper boundaries by metaphysical assertions or other professions of faith. The religious-minded man is free to accept whatever metaphysical explanation he pleases about the origin of these ideas, the archetypes. The scientist is a scrupulous worker. He cannot take heaven by storm. Should he allow himself to be reduced into such an extravagance, he would be sawing off the branch on which he sits. These caveats are certainly in order. However, metaphysics as a subject can be separated from the personal attitude which individuals may take about. One may take a dogmatic, unempirical attitude toward physics as well as toward metaphysics. Witness, for instance, the refusal to look into Galileo's telescope because it was known that Jupiter could not have moons. Metaphysics has been an honored subject of human concern since the beginning of recorded history. Just as a man's efforts to adapt to other aspects of reality began with naive, arbitrary, and concretely mythological viewpoints, so it has been in his relation to metaphysical reality. But this need not discredit the subject itself. Paul Tillich has made an astute observation concerning the relation between Jung's discoveries and metaphysics. He speaks of Jung's anxiety about what he calls metaphysics, and continues, This, it seems to me, does not agree with his actual discoveries, which, on many points, reach deeply into the dimension of a doctrine of being, that is, an ontology. This fear of metaphysics, which he shares with Freud and other 19th century conquerors of the spirit, is a heritage of this century. In taking the biological and necessary implication, the physical realm, into the genesis of archetypes, he has actually reached the ontological dimension, quote, imprinted upon the biological continuum, close quote, and this was unavoidable, given the revelatory power he attributes to the symbols in which the archetypes express themselves. For to be revelatory, one must express what needs revelation, namely, the mystery of being. Of course, Jung was not afraid of metaphysics. He explored that realm with great courage. He was not afraid of metaphysics, but of metaphysicians. Although figures don't lie, liars can figure. Likewise, although metaphysical reality can be demonstrated to some extent by the methods of psychological empiricism, those with no understanding of these methods can misuse the findings which are reported. Although Tillich is wrong about the nature of Jung's anxiety, he does make an important point, i.e., that the symbolic images of the unconscious, if they are to be revelatory, quote, must express what needs revelation, namely the mystery of being, close quote. In Ion, Jung says something similar. He writes, It is impossible to relate so-called metaphysical concepts which have lost their root connection with natural experience to living, universal psychic processes so that they can recover their true and original meaning. In this way, the connection is re-established between the ego and projected contents now formulated a metaphysical ideas. This is a carefully worded psychological statement. It might be added that a projected metaphysical content, when withdrawn from projection, may still retain its metaphysical quality. We know that occasionally dreams do reveal, to some extent, the mystery of being. Hence, these messages can properly be called metaphysical, i.e., beyond the physical or ordinary conceptions of life. Furthermore, these dreams of individuals, although they use unique imagery and convey an individual revelation to the dreamer, tend also to express a general or common viewpoint, a kind of perennial philosophy of the unconscious, which seems to have a more or less universal validity. This general validity can be best understood as being based on the universality of the urge to individuation. 2. A series of metaphysical dreams. Some years ago, I had the opportunity to observe a remarkable series of dreams containing many metaphysical images. The dreamer was a man who was standing close to death. He had death on both sides of him, so to speak. Just before the dream series began, he had made a sudden, impulsive, unpremeditated suicide attempt by swallowing a bottle full of sleeping pills. He was comatose for 36 hours and on the verge of death. 2.5 years later, he did die, in his late 50s, of a cerebral vascular accident. Over a period of about 2 years, intermittently, this man came to see me once a week and discussed his dreams. Our sessions could hardly be called analysis. The patient lacked the objective and self-critical capacity to assimilate any interpretation that would lead to an awareness of the shadow. What did happen was that we observed the dreams together and tried to discover the ideas they were trying to express. Repeatedly, I had the impression that the unconscious was trying to give the patient lessons in metaphysics, either to help him assimilate the meaning of his very close brush with death, or to prepare him to meet death in the near future. I must emphasize that this man had in no way gone through an individuation process as we use the term. Nevertheless, many of the images associated with the goal of that process were presented to him in the final dreams of his life. Over a 2-year period, the patient recorded approximately 180 dreams, of which 1/3 had definite metaphysical or transcendental allusions. Some of the dreams seemed to be presented from the standpoint of the ego, in which case there was an atmosphere of doom and tragedy. On awakening from these dreams, the dreamer was left in a mood of profound depression. Other dreams seemed to be an expression of a transpersonal standpoint, and these brought with them a sense of peace, joy, and security. A single example of the first category, I shall quote the following dream which he had 6 months before his death. I am at home, but it's nowhere I've been before. I go into the pantry to get some food. The shelves are stacked with seasonings and spices, all the same brand, but there's nothing to eat. I feel I am not alone in this house. It is just turning dawn, or is it the brilliant moonlight? I turn on the light, but it comes from another room. Something creaks. I am not alone. I wonder where my dog is. I need more light. I need more light and more courage. I am afraid. This dream probably expresses the fear of the ego in anticipation of meeting the intruder, death. Light is no longer with the ego, but in the other room. We are reminded of Goethe's last words, more light. There are only a few of this type of a dream. Much more frequent are those in the second category, which contain definite transpersonal imagery and which, I felt, attempted to give him lessons in metaphysics. From this group, I have selected 13 dreams to present and discuss. I give them in chronological order. Dream 1. I am to learn how to do the exercises of a Japanese Nuao play. It was my intention that at the end of the exercises, my body would arrive at a physical position which would be the equivalent of a Zen koan. The Nuao drama of Japan is a classical, highly formalized art form. The actors wear masks in other respects there are similarities to ancient Greek drama. The Nuao play expresses universal or archetypal realities. All emphasis is on the transpersonal. Nancy Wilson Ross describes it as follows. Anyone lending himself to the timeless experience of the Nuau never forgets it, though he may be quite incapable of conveying to others an exact sense of its peculiar enchantment. The Nuau explores time and space in ways unfamiliar to our Western aesthetic. The eerie use of the human voice, in which normal breathing has been artfully suppressed, the occasional long-drawn, sad and solitary notes of a flute, the periodic sharp cues and cat-like yowls from the chorus, the abrupt clacks of sticks in the varied tonality of three kinds of drum, the gliding ghostly dancers, the sudden summoning stamp on the bare resonant stage where every property has been abstracted to a mere symbol, the extravagant and lavish costumes, the unreal reality of the wooden masks worn by the participants. Above all, the artful use of emptiness and silence. These are a few of the traditional elements that help to create the special magic of Nuau. The dream says, therefore, that the patient must practice relating to archetypal realities. He must put aside personal considerations and begin to live under the aspect of eternity. The consequence of these experiences will be that his body becomes a Zen koan. A koan is a paradoxical anecdote or statement used by the Zen master in the hope that it will help the pupil break through to a level of new consciousness, illumination, or satori. Suzuki gives the following example. A pupil asks the master, "What is Zen?" He replies, quote, "When your mind is not dwelling in the dualism of good and evil, what is your original face before you were born?" Close quote. Such questions are meant to break through the ego-bound state and give one a glimpse of transpersonal reality. In Jungian terms, the self. One Buddhist scholar, after experienced satori, burned his previously treasured commentaries on the Diamond Sutra and exclaimed, quote, "However deep one's knowledge of the abstruse philosophy, it is like a piece of hair flying in the vastness of space. However important one's experience is things wordly, it is like a drop of water thrown into an unfathomable abyss." Close quote. I think we can assume that the dream is trying to convey some such attitude as this, urging the dreamer to relinquish his personal and ego-centered attitude in preparation for quitting this world. Dream 2. I was with several companions in Dali-esque landscape where things seemed either imprisoned or out of control. There were fires all about, coming out of the ground and about to engulf the place. By a group of effort, we managed to control the fires and restrict them to their proper place. In the same landscape, we found a woman lying on her back on a rock. The front side of her body was flesh, but the back of her head and body was a part of a living rock on which she lay. She had a dazzling smile, almost beatific, that seemed to accept her terrible plight. The controlling of the fire seemed to have caused a metamorphosis of some kind. There began a loosening of the rock at her back so that we were finally able to lift her off of it. Although she was still pretty stoned, she did not seem too heavy, and the change was continuing. We knew she would be whole again. The patient had a specific association to this dream. The fires reminded him of the fire that was said to accompany Hades when he broke out of the earth to capture Persephone. The dreamer had once visited Ulysses and was shown the spot where Hades was supposed to have emerged. He was also reminded of an unfinished statue of Michelangelo's. A figure coming out of the rock reminded us of the birth of a Mithra from the Petra Genetrix. The dream also has another analogy with the Mithra myth. One of the Mithra's first tasks was to tame the wild bull. Similarly, in the dream, controlling the fires was somehow connected with the emergence of the woman from the rock. By limiting the fires, a living woman is being extracted from the stone. This corresponds to the disengagement of Sophia from the embrace of Physis, which is accomplished by the quenching of the fires of desirousness. In a later dream, the feminine personification of wisdom or logos is again encountered. The image also suggests the separation of the soul from matter or the body, which is associated with death. There is a similar image in the ancient Greek alchemical text of Zosimos. Quote, "Go to the waters of the Nile, and there you will find a stone that has a spirit, pneuma. Take this, divide it, thrust it in your hand, and draw out its heart, for its soul, psyche, is in its heart." Close quote. An added note in the text states that this refers to the expulsion of the quicksilver. It is the alchemical idea of extracting the soul or spirit which is imprisoned in matter, and would correspond to the psychological process of extracting the meaning from a concrete experience, a stumbling stone. 1 Peter verses 2-9. In the context of the dreamer's situation, perhaps what was being extracted was the meaning of his earthly life. We must also consider the dreamer's association to Hades, Persephone, and the presumed site of the latter's abduction at Eleusis. This association also allows us to consider the dream as a modern individual version of the Eleusinian mysteries. In ancient Greece, initiation into the mysteries was considered most important in determining one's fate in the afterlife. In the Homeric hymn to Demeter, we read, "Happy is he among men upon earth who has seen these mysteries, but he who is uninitiated and who has no part in them never has a lot of like good things once he is dead, down in the darkness and gloom." Plato makes the same point. Those men who established the mysteries were not unenlightened, but in reality had a hidden meaning when they said long ago that whoever goes uninitiated and unsanctified to the other world will lie in the mire, but he who arrives there initiated and purified will dwell with the gods. Although little is known about the content of the Eleusinian mysteries, they must have included a death and resurrection ritual, since the Demeter core myth is concerned with this theme. The descent of Persephone to the underworld and the subsequent arrangement whereby she spends part of the year above ground and part of the year in the underworld as a definite reference to the green vegetation spirit which dies and is reborn each year. Thus the dream alludes to resurrection. The woman becoming disengaged from the rock will correspond to Persephone returning from the underworld. This line of interpretation is verified by a later dream in the series in which the green vegetation, Numen, symbolizing resurrection, is specifically portrayed. 3. Return to the beginning. Dream 3. It was a strange scene. I seemed to be in Africa, standing at the edge of an endless veldt, stretching as far as I could see. The heads of animals were emerging from the ground, or had emerged. It was very dusty. As I watched, some of the animals emerged completely. Some were quite tame, others quite wild. A rhinoceros and a zebra charged around kicking up a lot of dust. I wondered if this was the Garden of Eden. This dream has some similarity to the preceding one. Again, living creatures are coming out of solid earth. The dreamer commented that he felt he was being permitted to look in on the original creation. It is reminiscent of the remark of an alchemist. Neither be anxious to ask whether I actually possess this precious treasure, the philosopher's stone. Ask rather whether I have seen how the world was created, whether I am acquainted with the nature of the Egyptian darkness, what will be the appearance of the glorified bodies at the general resurrection. This author is demonstrating that he knew that the alchemical secret was not a substance but a state of consciousness, a perception of the archetypal level of reality. At the end of his personal life, the dreamer is being shown the universal beginning of life. Living forms are emerging from the amorphous inorganic earth. The emphasis on dust reminds us of the use of this image in Genesis. Quote, "The Lord God formed man of dust from the ground." Close quote. Genesis 2 verse 7. "You are dust, and dust you shall return." Dust is powdery, pulverized, dried out earth. It is similar to ashes, and the Hebrew word afar, here translated as dust, also means ashes. Ashes are the result of the alchemical kilsentio, which was alluded to in the fire of the second dream. But according to the third dream, out of the dusty ashes of burnt out of life, new life emerges. Shortly thereafter was another Welt dream. Dream 4. Again the landscape of the Welt, several acres of empty ground. Scattered about were loaves of bread of various shapes. They looked sedate and permanent like stones. We have again the symbol of the stone that came up first in Dream 2. There it was, a stone that was not a stone, but a woman. In the present dream it is a stone that is not a stone, but a loaf of bread. This motif of the stone that is not a stone is well known in alchemy, lithos ut lithos. It is the reference to the philosopher's stone, which according to Rouland is a substance which is petrine as regards its efficacy and virtue, but not as regards its substance. This statement would be an allusion to the reality of the psyche. In the 4th chapter of Matthew, the images of bread and stone are connected. During Jesus' temptation in the wilderness, the devil said to him, quote, "If you are the Son of God, command these stones to become loaves of bread." Close quote. But he answered, "It is written, man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceeds from the mouth of God." Again, in Matthew 7:9, stone and bread are linked. Or what man of you, if his sons ask him for a loaf, will give him a stone? These passages establish that bread is a human requirement, that stone does not satisfy human needs, and that willingness to turn stone to bread, i.e. to unite these opposites, is a prerogative of deity. Thus this dream is providing a glimpse behind the metaphysical barrier, or, as Jung calls it, the epistemological curtain, the figures behind which are impossible unions of opposites, transcendental beings which can only be apperceived by contrast. Dream 5. I was invited to a party for Adam and Eve. They had never died. They were the beginning and the end. I realized this and accepted their permanent existence. Both of them were enormous, over scale, like Malleol's sculptures. They had a sculptural and not a human look. Adam's face was veiled or covered, and I longed to know what he looked like. I dared to try to uncover his face, and I did. The covering was a very heavy layer of peat mosses, or some sort of vegetable growth. I pulled it away just a little and peeped behind. His face was kind but frightening. It was like a gorilla or a giant ape of some sort. The location of this party is obviously the eternal, archetypal realm. The figures never die, but live in an eternal present. The kingdom of heaven is the place where one meets the ancient worthies. Matthew 8:11 says, I tell you, many will come from east and west and sit at table with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob in the kingdom of heaven. The dream figures were said to be both beginning and end. Traditionally, the characteristics of being both beginning and end has never been applied to Adam. However, it is applied to Christ, who was called the second Adam. As a logos, he existed from the beginning and was the agent of creation. The Apostle Paul's whole passage on the resurrection, which mentions the second Adam, deuteros anthropos, is relevant to this dream. The first man, Adam, became a living being. The last Adam became a living-giving spirit, life-giving spirit. The first man was from the earth, a man of dust. The second man is from heaven. Just as we have been born the image of man of dust, we shall bear the image of the man who of heaven. Lo, I tell you a mystery. We shall not all sleep, but we shall be changed in a moment, in the twinkling of an eye, at the last trumpet. For the trumpet will sound, and the dead will be raised imperishable, and we shall be changed. For this perishable nature must put on the imperishable, and this mortal nature must put on immortality. Adam, as the first man, is an image of the anthropos, the primal man of Gnostic speculation. According to the Gnostic Hermetic treatise Poimandres, the eternal mind gave birth to the anthropos, which then fell into the world of spatio-temporal existence because nature loved him. And nature took the object of her love and wound herself completely around him, and they were intermingled, for they were lovers. And this is why, beyond all creatures on earth, man is twofold, mortal because of body, but because of the essential man, immortal. The anthropos is the pre-existent form of a man, the eternal Platonic idea, the divine thought, which became incarnated by the embrace of physis. Thus, for the dreamer to be introduced to Adam suggests that he is being shown his original face prior to the birth of the ego, and implies that a process of disincarnation is coming. Dream 6. I am in a garden, a handsome sunken terrace. The place is called the Thoughts of God. Here it is believed that the 12 words of God are to conquer the world. Its walls are lined like a nest with ivy and something as soft as down or fur. I, together with others, am walking inside the enclosure. The force of the worlds come with the force of an explosion or earthquake that knocks us to the ground. The cushioned walls prevent one from being hurt. It is the custom in this enclosure to walk next to the walls around the walk. The point is to complete the circle either clockwise or anti-clockwise. As we walk, the area grows smaller and more intimate, more padded, and more like a nest. The walking itself seems to have something to do with the process of learning. This dream further elaborates themes to which previous dreams have alluded. Again, the dreamer is taken to the pre-existent beginning, the source of the logos. I know of no reference to the 12 words of God. However, in the Kabbalah, the divine name is sometimes said to consist of 12 letters. More commonly it is thought of as having 4 letters. The tetragrammaton, Yod, He, Vav, He. According to Mathers, the tetragrammaton is capable of 12 transpositions, which all convey the meaning of to be. It is the only word that will bear so many transpositions without its meaning being altered. They are called the 12 banners of the mighty name, and are said by some to rule the 12 signs of the zodiac. The dream makes it clear that the garden of the thoughts of God is a circle with 12 words emanating from it. It would thus be analogous to the signs of the zodiac, which are a 12-fold differentiation of the circle of the year. Other parallels would be the 12 sons of Jacob and the 12 disciples of Christ. The pantheons of many peoples were made of 12 gods. According to Herodotus, the Egyptians were the first to name the 12 gods. An unusual feature is that the 12 words of God are said to conquer the world. The typical function of the logos is to create the world, not conquer it. Perhaps this is an allusion to the fact that surely the conscious ego, world equals ego, is to be extinguished in death. The same idea is implied by the fact that the circular nest grows smaller as it is circumambulated, becoming more and more of a padded womb. The nest symbol emphasizes the maternal, protective, containing aspect of returning to the metaphysical source, and would surely be reassuring to the ego anxious about death. The nest where eggs are laid and hatched also has rebirth implications. For instance, we are told that in Egypt the New Year's festival was called the Day of the Child in the Nest. The nest was lined with ivy. According to Fraser, ivy was sacred to both Attis and Osiris. The priests of Attis were tattooed with a pattern of ivy leaves, because it is evergreen and non-deciduous. Fraser suggested it may have represented the seal of a diviner life, as something exempt from the sad vicissitudes of the seasons, constant and eternal as the sky. The evergreen ivy is even more explicitly connected with Osiris as the immortal vegetation spirit. The image is given fuller expression in Dream 9. 4. The transcendent dimension. Dream 7. 2 prize fighters are involved in a ritual fight. Their fight is beautiful. They are not so much antagonists in the dream as they are collaborators, working out an elaborate planned design. They are calm, unruffled, and concentrated. At the end of each round, they retire to a dressing room. In the dressing room, they apply makeup. I watch one of them dip his finger in some blood and smear it on the face of his opponent and himself. They return to the ring and resume their fast, furious, but highly controlled performance.
This dream gives one of the eerie feeling that it is a glimpse of the human life appears from beyond the veil of Maya. The strife between the opposites is reconciled by being seen as part of a larger design. There is a fight, but no one gets hurt. It is only a beautiful dramatic spectacle. There is blood, but it is only make-up, belonging to the world of appearance and illusion. The lesson of the dream seems to be very similar to that given by Krishna to Arjuna in the Bhagavad Gita, where also there is the image of the fight, the war which Arjuna is reluctant to engage in it. O mighty among men, he is fit to attain immortality who is serene and not afflicted by these sensations, but it is the same in pleasure and pain. There is no existence for the unreal, and the real can never be non-existent. The seers of truth know the nature and final ends of both. Know that to be indestructible, by which all this is pervaded, no one is ever able to destroy the immutable. These bodies are perishable, but the dwellers in these bodies are eternal, indestructible, and impenetrable. Therefore fight, O descendant of Bharatara. He who considers this self as a slayer, or he who thinks that this self is slain, neither of these knows the truth, for it does not slay, nor is it slain. This self is never born, nor does it die, nor after once having been does it go into non-being. This self is unborn, eternal, changeless, ancient. Dream 8. There are 3 squares, heating units, made of metal coil or neon tubing. They represent my sexual problems. Now they have been disconnected and are being cleaned. There is a new world concept of God, a widening of awareness of the vastness of the universe. Against the background of eternity, a thing as temporal as a sexual problem is inconsequential. The washing is in a sense of ritual washing, a cleansing of the 3 squares to let them fall into their natural place in the vast overall. In the dream, my mind played with the visual image of the 3 squares. It was only natural to draw a circle, first inside each, then outside each. In the dream, the reference to the eternal, divine realm as contrasted with the temporal, personal realm is made explicit. The 3 squares apparently represent the dreamer's personal, particularized existence in space and time. They are associated with sexuality, the source of heat or energy. The fact that there are 3 squares brings up the symbolic meaning of the triad, which is discussed in Chapter 7. Threeness refers to dynamic existence in historical reality. It expresses the painful dialectic of the developmental process which proceeds according to the Hegelian formula of thesis, antithesis, and synthesis. The square, on the other hand, is a fourfold image, which expresses totality with emphasis on the static, structural, containing aspects. In Eastern symbolism, the square represents the earth in contrast to heaven. According to an ancient idea, the human soul is a square. The circle, in contrast, is a common symbol for God and eternity. Thus, when the dreamer draws a circle within the square, and another one surrounding the square, he is combining the individual and personal with the eternal and transpersonal. The dream expresses the same idea in its statement that the squares, quote, fall into their natural place in the vast overall, close quote. The image of a square containing a circle and surrounded by a circle has parallels in alchemy. If we move from within outward, the inner circle would correspond to the prima materia, the original boundless chaos. The square would represent the separation of the prima materia into the 4 elements, that is, the discrimination that the conscious ego brings out of the original undifferentiated whole. However, as Jung states, the square is an imperfect form because in the square the elements are still separate and hostile to one another. Thus they need to be reunited in a higher unity. The quintessence, which would correspond to the outer circle surrounding the square. According to the dream, this reunification of the square is a process of finding its natural place in the vast overall. In the psychological condition of the first cycle, prior to emergence of squareness, is beautifully described by Black Elk, a Sioux, holy man. He is deploring the fact that Indians now live in square houses. He says, "We made these little gray houses of logs that you see, and they are square. It is a bad way to live, for there can be no power in a square." Quote, "You have noticed that everything everything an Indian does is in a circle, and that it is because of the power of the world always works in circles, and everything tries to be round. In the old days when we were a strong and happy people, all our power came to us from the sacred hoop of the nation. And so long as the hoop was unbroken, the people flourished. The flowering tree was the living center of the hoop, and the circle of the four quarters nourished it. The east gave peace and light, the south gave warmth, the west gave rain, and the north with its cold and mighty wind gave strength and endurance. This knowledge came to us from the outer world with our religion. Everything the power of the world does is done in a circle. The sky is round, and I have heard that the earth is round like a ball, and so are all the stars. The wind, in its greatest power, whirls. Birds make their nests in circles, for theirs is the same religion as ours. The sun comes forth and goes down in a circle. The moon does the same, and both are round. Even the seasons form a great circle, and they're changing, and always come back again to where they are. The life of a man is a circle from childhood to childhood, and so it is in everything where power moves. Our teepees were round like the nests of birds, and these were always set in a circle, the nation's hoop, a nest of many nests, where the Great Spirit meant for us to hatch our children. But the Washu, white men, have put us in these square boxes. Our power is gone and we are dying, for the power is not in us anymore." Dream 9. I am alone in a great formal garden such as one finds in Europe. The grass is an unusual kind of turf, centuries old. There are great hedges of boxwood and everything is completely ordered. At the end of the garden I see a movement. At first it seems to be an enormous frog made of grass. As I get closer I see it is actually a green man, herbal, made of grass. He is doing a dance. It is very beautiful, and I think of Hudson's novel Green Mansions. It gave me a sense of peace, although I could not really understand what I was beholding. In this dream we have remarkably explicit representation of the vegetation spirit which played such an important part in ancient mythology and which has received a comprehensive discussion in Fraser's Golden Bough. The most fully developed image in this category is Osiris as corn spirit, tree spirit, and god of fertility. The death and rebirth of vegetation were episodes in his drama. The ivy was sacred to him and was called his plant because it was always green. On the symbolism of greenness, Jung says, in the sphere of Christian psychology, green has a spermatic, procreative quality, and for this reason it is the color attributed to the Holy Ghost as the creative principle. And again, green is the color of the Holy Ghost, of life, procreation, and resurrection. An example of the greenness of the Holy Ghost is found in Hildegard of Binion's hymn to the Holy Ghost. Quote, "From you the clouds rain down, the heavens move, the stones have their moisture, the waters give forth streams, and the earth sweats out greenness." Close quote. This passage has a close parallel to an ancient Egyptian hymn to Osiris, which says, "The world waxes green through him." Another connection between greenness and resurgent life is found in an Egyptian pyramid text. This passage evokes Kherperher, the becoming one, the scarab god who is the rising sun. Hail thou God, who revolvest Kherperher. Hail, green one. Greenness is an important image in alchemy. Subtexts refer to it as the benedictia verditatis, blessed greenness. According to Milos, the soul of the world, or anima mundi, is green. God breathed into created things a certain germination or greenness, by which all things should apply. They called all the things green, for to be green means to grow. Therefore, this virtue of generation and the preservation of things might be called the soul of the world. In another alchemical text, the feminine personification of the black and rejected prima materia says, I am alone among the hidden. Nevertheless, I rejoice in my heart, because I can live privately and refresh myself in myself. Under my blackness, I have hidden the fairest green. Young interprets this passage as follows. The state of imperfect transformation, merely hoped for and waited for, does not seem to be one of torment only, but of positive, if hidden happiness. It is the state of someone who, in his wanderings among the images of psychic transformation, comes upon a secret happiness which reconciles him to his apparent loneliness. In communing with himself, he finds not deadly boredom and melancholy, but an inner partner. More than that, a relationship that seems like the happiness of the secret love, or like a hidden springtime, when the green seed sprouts from the barren earth, holding out the promise of future harvests. It is the alchemical benedictiva veritatis, the blessed greenness, signifying on the one hand the leprosy of the meals, verdigris, on the other secret eminence of the divine spirit of life in all things. What Jung refers to as the secret happiness accompanying the discovery of the green one would correspond, perhaps, to the sense of peace which the dreamer describes. For this man who is shortly to die, the unconscious is presenting a vivid and beautiful image of the eternal nature of life, whose particular manifestations are continually passing away, but which is being continually reborn in new forms. The dream expresses the same idea as the words of Paul in his resurrection passage. Quote, Death is swallowed up in victory. O death, where is thy sting? O grave, where is thy victory? 1 Corinthians 15:54. 5. Completion of the opus. Dream 10. As in Ginsberg Legends of the Jews, where God was in personal communication with various individuals, he seemed to have assigned to me a test, distasteful in every way, for which I was in no way fitted, technically or emotionally. First, I was to search for and find a man who was expecting me, and together we were to follow exactly the instructions. The end result was to become an abstract symbol beyond our comprehension, with religious or sacred or taboo connotations. The task involved removing the man's hands at the wrists, trimming them and untying them to make a hexagonal shape. 2 rectangles, one from each hand, were to be removed, leaving windows of a sort. The rectangles themselves were also symbols of great value. The results were to be mummified, dried up, and black. All of it took a long time, was extremely delicate and difficult. He bore it stoically, as it were his destiny as well as mine, and in the end the result, we believed, was what was demanded. When we looked at the symbol that had resulted from our labors, it had an impenetrable aura of mystery about it. We were both exhausted by the ordeal. The dreamer had browsed in Ginsberg Legends of the Jews at the house of a friend, but had done no extensive reading in this book. Also, his knowledge of the Old Testament was minimal. The dream is reminiscent of tasks imposed on individuals by Yahweh, i.e., Jonah, Hosea, etc. If one's life is governed by the sense of a divine task, this means psychologically that the ego is subordinated to the self and has been freed of ego-centered preoccupations. Something of this idea is indicated by the nature of the task imposed in the dream. A man's hands are to be amputated. This rather grisly, primitive image expresses a psychological process. The same image occurs in alchemy as the lion with his paws cut off, and in more extreme form as the dismembered man in the Splendor Solis treatise. The hands are the agency of the conscious will, hence to have them cut off would correspond to the experience of the impotence of the ego. In Jung's words, the experience of the self is always a defeat for the ego. The next step in the dream task is to unite the amputated hands into a hexagon. Here we have a reference to the union of the opposites, right and left, conscious and unconscious, good and evil. The product of the union is a sixfold figure. A well-known sixfold symbol, which also is made of the union of the two similar but contrasting elements, is the so-called Solomon's seal. It consists of two triangles, one pointing upward and one downward. For the alchemists, it represented the union of fire and water. For others, it has signified the interpretation of the trinity of spirit, upward pointing, and the Catonic trinity of matter, downward pointing, and hence symbolized the process of interrelation between the two. The number 6 is associated with the completion or fulfillment of a creative task. In Genesis, the world was created in 6 days, with the final act, the creation of Adam, on the 6th day. Jesus was crucified on the 6th day of the week. According to Jonas Lindus, quoted by Young, the number 6 is most skilled in begetting, for it is even and uneven, partaking both of the active nature on account of the uneven, and the cyclical nature on account of the even. For which reason the ancients also named it marriage and harmony. And they say also that it is both male and female. And others say that the number 6 is soul-producing because it multiplies itself into the world sphere, and because in it the opposites are mingled. Summing up the meaning of these amplifications, the dream seems to say that a task must be performed whereby the powers of individual ego, for both good and evil, are separated or extracted from their union with that ego and reunited in an abstract supra-personal image. When the two rectangular windows are added, a rather eerie effect is created, reminding one of a primitive mass. The net result is a geometrical image, which I would venture to suggest is a symbolic representation of the face of God. Dream 11. There is a darkness, but with a luminosity in it, not describable, a darkness somehow glowing. Standing in it is a beautiful golden woman, with an almost Mona Lisa face. Now I realize that the glow is emanating from a necklace she is wearing. It is of great delicacy. Small capuchons of turquoise, each circled in reddish gold. It has great meaning for me, as if there were a message in the complete image if only I could break through its elusiveness. The dreamer, who was quite uninformed about philosophy and religion, did not know that the opening passage in the Gospel of John concerning the Logos. It is certainly relevant to the dream. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. All things were made through him, and without him was not anything made that was made. In him was life, and the life was the light of men. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. John 1, 1-15, 1-5. John's Logos doctrine applied to the Christ, the Logos theory of Hellenistic philosophy. Christ became the creative word or the thought of God who had been with him from the beginning. In Gnostic circles, the Logos was equated with Sophia, the feminine personification of wisdom. The same image had already appeared in the Hebrew wisdom literature. For instance, she is mentioned in this prayer to God. With you is wisdom, she who knows your works, she who was present when you made the world. She understands what is pleasing in your eyes and what agrees with your commandments. Marie-Louise von Franz, in her Aura Consurgens, had discussed at length the figure of Sophia or Serpentia Dia. She writes, in patristic literature, she was mostly interpreted as Christ, the pre-existent Logos, or as the sum of rational eternae, eternal forms, of the self-knowing primordial causes, exemplars, ideas, prototypes in the mind of God. She was also considered the archetypus, mundus, that archetypal world after whose likeness the sensible world was made, and through which God becomes conscious of himself. Serpentia Dia is thus the sum of archetypal images in the mind of God. Thomas Aquinas expresses the same idea. Divine wisdom devised the world and devised the order of the universe residing in the distinction of things. And therefore we must say that in the divine wisdom are the models of all things, which we have called ideas, exemplary forms existing in the divine mind. The golden woman with the Mona Lisa face in the dream is thus Sophia or divine wisdom. Her luminous necklace of blue and gold would be a kind of celestial rosary which unites on a single circular string various forms and modes of being as the circle of the year unites the signs of the zodiac, the sum of archetypal images in the mind of God. Dream 12. I have been set a task nearly too difficult for me. A log of hard and heavy wood lies covered in the forest. I must uncover it, saw or hew from it a circular piece, and then carve through the piece a design. The result is to be preserved at all costs, as representing something no longer recurring, in danger of being lost. At the same time, a tape recording is to be made describing in detail what it is and what it represents, its whole meaning. At the end, the thing itself and the tape are to be given to the public library. Someone says that the only library will know how to prevent the tape from deteriorating within 5 years. Again, with the theme of the difficult assigned task analogous to the alchemical opus. The covered log is the hidden original material which first must be uncovered or made manifest, and then given a special form which has some uniqueness, since it will not recur again. The carved design is a fivefold image. The number 5 occurs again in the remark that there is danger of deterioration in 5 years. The symbolism of 5 comes up in the quintessence of the alchemists. It is the fifth form and ultimate unity of the 4 elements and hence the final goal of the process. Rouland says the quintessence is the medicine itself and the quality of substances separated by the heart from the body. Jung says that the number 5 suggests the predominance of the physical man. This would correspond to the fact that the dream image reminds one of an abstract human figure with the 5 protuberances, 4 limbs, and head. Hence it would suggest the goal and completion of physical existence. The deposit of the object and a tape recording of its meaning in the public library raises some very interesting points. In some respects, the object and the tape recording can be considered as synonymous since the sketch of the object looks much like a reel of a recording tape. But this line of association, the task can be seen as the transformation of wood into word, i.e. matter into spirit. It is possible that this dream was foreshadowing the fact that I would publish a series of his dreams in the future. The task would then be the recording of his dreams, which he deposited with me. However, especially in the context of the other dreams, the simple, personalistic interpretation is completely inadequate to the data. Much more likely is the assumption that the dream task refers to a psychological life task, the results of which are to be deposited as a permanent increment to a collective or transpersonal library, i.e. a word or spirit treasury. The motif of the treasure house is found in alchemy as a synonym for the philosopher's stone. The fifth parable of Aura Surgens is entitled, quote, of the treasure house which wisdom built upon a rock, close quote. Alphidius says that this is the treasure house in which are treasured up all the sublime things of science or wisdom, or the glorious things which cannot be possessed. In Alphidius, the treasure house is a fourfold structure, and thus clearly a symbol of the self. A similar treasury image occurs in Catholic theology concerning the treasure of merits accumulated by Christ and the saints. In spite of the concretistic misuse of this image by the Church to justify the sale of indulgences, it is an archetypal idea which expresses some aspect of the objective psyche. In the examples cited, the treasury, when found, will convey benefits to the finder. In our dream, however, the dreamer is not making a withdrawal for his own use, but rather a deposit which will augment the public treasury. We recall the words of Jesus, quote, even as the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve, close quote. The dream seems to imply that the psychological accomplishments of the individual leave some permanent spiritual residue that augments the cumulative collective treasury, a sort of positive collective karma. In that case, the words of Milton concerning a good book could apply equally to the fruits of the inner psychological task of individuation. A permanent spiritual deposit is left which is the precious lifeblood of the master spirit, embalmed and treasured up on purpose to a life beyond life. The dream mentions the need to prevent deterioration. Some preservation or embalming process is required. Dream 10 brought up the same theme in the mummification of the amputated hands. Perhaps the significance of these references corresponds to the archetypal symbolism that lay behind the elaborate embalming procedure of ancient Egypt. This idea seems provocative, although I cannot pursue it further at present. Dream 13. I was looking at a curiously unique and beautiful garden. It was a large square with a floor of stone. At intervals of about 2 feet were placed brass objects, standing upright and looking very much like Brancusi's bird in space. I stayed a long time. It had a very positive meaning. What that was, I was unable to grasp. Brancusi's bird in space is a graceful, slightly curved vertical pole of polished metal thicker in its mid-region and tapering to a point at the top. It brings up the whole question of the symbolism of the pole or pillar. In simplest terms, it represents the phallic, striving, vertical thrust toward the upper spirit realm. It may signify the axis mundi, which is the connection between the human world and the transpersonal divine world. On such a cosmic pole, the gods descend to manifest themselves, or the primitive shaman ascends to seek his ecstatic vision. An Egyptian religious ritual gives us some other symbolic implications of a vertical pole, or pillar. In the rites which celebrated the death and resurrection of Osiris, the ceremonies culminated when the chief priest set the so-called diadem column upright. R.T. Rundle Clark says about this column, the idea of the diadem column is that it stands firmly upright. For to be upright is to be alive, to have overcome the inert forces of death and decay. When the dyad is upright, it implies that life will go on in the world. The Pistis Sophia speaks of a treasury of light in which are gathered the particles of light that have been redeemed from their imprisonment in the darkness of matter. This treasury is a kind of intermediate collecting station which then transmits the accumulated light to a higher region, the world of light, by means of light stream called the pillar of glory. According to Manichaean doctrine, the elect perform the redemptive function for the scattered light. Having been reborn through gnosis, the elect become instruments for the gathering and concentration of light particles dispersed in matter. At the time of death, each carries his accumulated bundle of light out of the material world and into the eternal realm of light. Brancusi's sculpture, plunging skyward, might be compared with the pillar of glory, through which the collected particles of redeemed light stream into the eternal realm. A similar image occurs in the Manichaean eschatology. At the end of the time, the last statue or pillar appears. All the light that can still be saved is united in the great idea, in the form of the last statue, which rises up to heaven, while the damned and the demons, matter with its lust and bisexuality, are cast into a pit sealed over with an immense stone. Young refers to the Manichaean statue and relates it to an alchemical text. He writes, "It is clear that the statue or pillar is either the perfect primordial man, or at least his body, both at the beginning of creation and at the end of time. The dream image, which combines the stone square with poles, has a parallel in ancient Semitic sanctuaries as described by Frazer. He writes, "We know that at all the old Canaanite sanctuaries, including the sanctuaries of Jehovah, down to the reformations of Hezekiah and Josiah, the two regular objects of worship were a sacred stalk and a sacred stone, and that these sanctuaries were the seats of profligate rites performed by sacred men, Keddishim, and sacred women, Keddishoth. Jeremiah refers to the sacred stalk and stone when he criticizes the Israelites for saying to a stalk, 'Thou art my father,' and to a stone, 'Thou hast brought me forth.' Stone and pole are therefore representations of the feminine and masculine deities respectively. In psychological terms, the dream is thus presenting a conjunctio of the masculine and feminine principles. Why there should be a multiplicity of masculine poles contained within one stone square, I do not know. Perhaps it has a similar implications to the multiplicity of pearls in the necklace of Sophia. However, as an expression of totality and the union of opposites, it is an image of completion. This dream is one of the last I had of this patient. 3 months later, he died. This dream series demonstrates, I think, that the unconscious under certain circumstances brings up considerations which properly can be called metaphysical. Although the dreamer did not undergo the process of individuation in the usual sense of that term, it can be surmised that the pressure of impending death may have telescoped that process. Certainly, these dreams suggest an urgency on the part of the unconscious to convey awareness of a metaphysical reality, as if such an awareness were important to have before one's physical death. The question will be asked, what effect did these dreams have on the dreamer? This is difficult to answer with certainty. Practically, all of the dreams reported here had an intense emotional impact on the dreamer. But interestingly, he experienced this impact only when recounting the dreams in the analytic session, not beforehand. Somehow, the presence of the analyst was needed to release the numinosity of the dream images. Taken as a whole, the dreams conveyed a series of small religious experiences which brought about a gradual and definite change in the dreamer's life attitude. This unreligious, unphilosophical man was given a metaphysical initiation. As a result, he was at least partially released from preoccupation with personal frustrations, and his personality acquired a new level of depth and dignity. After being brought back from near death, he voiced the question several times, "Why is my life prolonged?" Perhaps these dreams contained the answer.